Go ahead and close this. So what we're going to be looking at is this here. I'm working on this kind of flower concept where, again, it's like that time lapse. The light comes on, and then we see the petals open, and then they're each kind of doing their own thing on their own time here, kind of opening, but then having a little bit of that, that kind of overlapping action where they kind of come down and open, and then I've got the camera doing its thing, and I'll just hit play. You can see some of the timing here. And it's definitely moving a little slower than 24p. So I want to talk about the setup of doing this because it's actually quite simple, and if you're not familiar with some of this in Cinema 4D, I definitely don't want you leaving this semester without this kind of basic knowledge of the things that you can do with a cloner and then with using some effectors. So let's just go ahead and see how quickly we can create this. This is exactly what I did. I started with a cube, like so, and then I was gonna create my leaf, right? I just need a single leaf petal. So the first thing I'm gonna do is add a Z segment right there. I also need one X segment. Then I'm going to hit C. So now that I'm working with a live object, I'm going to work on this model in points mode. And let me know if everything, you're hearing me, seeing me okay. Good stuff. So let's just see how quickly I can get this flower petal set up here. And you could always just buy a model. You could always look on the SketchUp warehouse, the Google 3D warehouse for models, as long as they are, totally Creative Commons, open source, royalty free, all that good stuff. Then it shouldn't be an issue. I'm going to pull these ends out. And basically, I'm just kind of making a diamond shape for my leaf here, for my petal. And it's going to look a little rough. That's okay, in my opinion. Then I'm going to go ahead and stick this guy in a hypernerb, and then you're going to see it start to round out some of those edges. And it's going to look a little rough. We are going to have to subdivide it just a little bit more, but I want it to have this bend in the center, like I think a leaf would. And then I'll pull this backside down a little bit. Maybe we pull this down a little bit more. I just want to give it a little bit of that shape. And pull that back down a little bit. All right, so I get this base shape going. I'm going to actually ask it to subdivide 3 times as opposed to twice in the viewer. Just smooth out a little bit of what was going on with those edges there. Now we talked about joints and rigging and all that, but sometimes you don't even need that. You just need a single deformer. So I'm going to go into my deformers and grab a bend. I'm going to engage the strength a little bit just so I can see what I'm working with here. And then basically I just want to lay this guy flat, so 90 degrees this way. Let's go back this way, 90 degrees this way. And then I'm going to try to dial in the size of this so that it's not going off in every direction, right? I just want it to affect this guy here. It can be pretty thin. And then I'm just going to give it a real good bend to see how I'm doing. And I can see that it's wanting to bend really only in the middle because I don't have enough subdivisions going yet. So that is going to lead me to turn off my hypernerb and go to kind of the faces mode for modeling. Then again, I'm going to go to my mesh tools, my mesh create tools, and I'm just going to pull out this whole dock. Inside the mesh create tools, we have the knife tool. And I'm going to grab a loop. We need to make some edge loops here. And I want it to be able to bend not just in the center, right, but all the way down. So I'm going to kind of split the difference halfway, split the difference halfway, kind of split the difference again, split the difference again, and split the difference again. So now I've got these edge loops running across the face, where if I go ahead and try that bend again, you see we're going to get a way, oops, you see we're going to get a way smoother bend, right? Where now it's not just bending in the center, it's actually holding to its entire shape, and I think it's looking pretty good. So we'll go ahead and take it back to 0. Just going to go back to my regular mode here. Now I want to bury this entire piece inside of a null object that is kind of strategically placed. I want the null, I actually really need the null to be, I need the null to be on the other side. I need the null to be right here so that it's at the very tip and the bend comes from the other direction, so that's good. So I'm going to take the hypernerb, make it a child of the null. So now that I can move this guy around in this null object, so I'm actually going to go ahead and stand it up on end here. And let's see. Now when I do this bend, you can start to see the beginnings of our first petal here. That's going to come down like so. Next thing we're going to do is grab a cloner object and go ahead and make the null object a child of the cloner. Now it kind of jumps off into space because fix clone is checked. I'm just going to uncheck that. And we're not going to turn on render instances, and that'll make more sense as to why. I'm going to take the Y property down to 0. I don't want to distribute. So in a cloner object, if you have the mode set to linear, you can move it off in these directions and make clones this way, but you can also actually just take, we don't want the bank, there we go. We can actually just rotate it out in space. So let's go ahead and make some more copies, and then we could start to pull this back a little bit and decide how close we want these or how far apart we want these. So how many could we fit in here cleanly? 8. Could we do a 9th? So this is a little more than I was doing. This could get tricky, but that's okay. Now, to go ahead and move how far apart these are, we're actually just going to move the position of the null, right? So if they're super close, that's where it is. And let's go ahead and do something more like 7. I don't care that they overlap entirely, but that was a little much. So the great thing about this setup, in my view, is now we can come back to this bend effector and see that, right, now I'm affecting all of these objects at once. So it feels a lot more complicated than in reality it really is. Let's pull these out a little bit. So let's go ahead and get some keyframes on here so that we can talk about the next thing we need to do. So let's just take it from 0. I'm going to go forward about 1.5 seconds, so pretty quickly. Open these guys up about 200%. Go forward a little bit, pull that back. And then we'll go to the end of our timeline and go forward. So a little like a simpler version of what I was doing, right? So it opens and then kind of settles. And we would need to go into the graph editor and work on that. But the next thing we need to look at is making sure everything isn't so uniform. So the first thing we can do is take a random effector. And you see the random effector by default is going to move everybody's position around, right? And now that's actually not terrible, but I don't want it to move in the X. Really don't want it to move in Z. I could maybe move it in the Y if we wanted our petals offset. It looks a little more like a palm tree. Or I could take that back a little bit. And let's just say a little bit less. So we can start to break up that top line. You see, instead of having it set to 0 where everything falls even, we'll go ahead and break that up a little bit. Let's go ahead and do scale as well. I'm going to say uniform scale. And let's go ahead and make sure they're not all exactly the same size. And then the last thing we're going to do is this time offset feature. So let me actually open this up, my timeline, to 120 frames. And this is going to offset the timing of each one. So let's say it's a pretty short timeline. So I'm just going to offset them 10 frames, right? So now instead of that animation all happening simultaneously, we're going to get a little bit of that offset, right? So now we're getting something that I think is starting to look a little more dynamic. And you can see we're going to need to work with a little bit of some of the details if this was really a shot we were developing. Let's come back into here. Yeah, what I was doing with the light is really simple, and I hope that that's something you all feel confident that you can use, is to actually animate your lights in 3D. So I had a spotlight, and I have my render settings way up on the other one. But on that light, I was using a bit of visible volumetric light. And volumetric light is just a great tool. Right, let's see. Right, this is volumetric light, where you can actually see the light rays and all that good stuff. And if we actually create a ground plane to bounce some GI off of, then we might be able to see it even better. And super low settings, so it should be relatively quick. So this is this volumetric light ray. Something I also really like to do is to make sure that my fall off is set to inverse square, physically accurate fall off. I like the way that lights behave much better when there is a more natural fall off, and I think I was using kind of a warm light in the previous scene. Let's go back to this other one, actually. I need to take my settings way down, because I had this way up. Also had a bit of depth of field. And then on texturing, you know, it's just a matter of playing with the various channels of a texture, right? Playing with the gradients, playing with putting noise in the diffusion channels, putting noise in the color channels, and all that sort of thing. So this was me, you know, playing for maybe an hour and a half yesterday with this concept of the leaf petals. And I'm sure this is a decently well-established thing in the world of tutorials online, but it really is, if you're somewhat new to Cinema 4D or new to 3D, it's just a really good thing to understand the way that cloner objects, they can make duplicates for you. Like if you have an element, you can clone it a million times over, but then you can make sure that it's not super uniform, right? Use a random effector on the size, use the time offset if your base null that's inside the cloner has some type of animation that you want to offset and distribute in a certain way. So you see, this was like the beginnings of the scene I was working on here, with this super strong volumetric light kind of cutting into the frame, where then the camera is going to do this slow move to kind of get a look at the close-up. So that is, that's just another tool, something that's really super easy and fast to do. You know, it should be very, very quick to model these elements and go ahead and get something going. And we need a lot of work on this one, but I hope that this is a tool set you can understand really easily, and then you know, find ways to use in your work. So let's see, broad question. Is C4D used more in movies, video games, or MoGraph videos in general? I would say Cinema 4D is used mostly in, I would say, motion design. I think they really built Cinema 4D for motion designers. Let's see, I think Robert says, I think C4D, and Robert's got a background in games. C4D has been getting more popular in games, but I think Maya and Max are more widely used, yeah. Feature films don't really use Cinema 4D. They almost exclusively use Maya or some kind of proprietary software like they do at DreamWorks. Adobe Max, I know, is big time for video games. But honestly, Cinema 4D can do basically everything that these other systems can do. And I know with Unity development, now the coding game engine of Unity has a pipeline from Cinema 4D. If gaming is an area you're interested in, C4D is a great thing to learn, right? You could totally imagine building your worlds, building your characters in Cinema 4D, and then working into Unity. Would it be wise to work in C4D first and then learn Maya? So I first started in Maya doing character animation at Animation Mentor, an online school, and then I switched to Cinema 4D. And I would say that the concepts of geometry, the concepts of texturing, the concepts of rendering are exactly the same in the different software. Maybe the buttons are a little different, but no matter which 3D platform you work in first, there's going to be a lot of knowledge that you're going to take with you to another one. Like if you made me stop using Cinema and I had to replace it with Maya for everything, there'd be a little bit of a learning curve, but you could totally do that because a lot of the same principles are exactly the same, right? Of creating geometry, texturing it, lighting it, rendering it. The workflow is really, really similar. So I think just if you're interested in 3D at all, just jumping into Cinema 4D or Maya is definitely good. And if you want to be in gaming, I mean, Robert would be a good person to ask about this actually, of what is the best thing to learn if you want to build your own original games. I don't totally know the answer to that because I don't have experience in building games, but I would think C4D would be a pretty great tool for you, especially now that there is a pipeline that can get you straight into Unity. So yeah, would love to see any type of game stuff you're working on, Mike, definitely. Uh-oh, did we freeze? Okay. Okay, folks, that's going to do it for today. We went a little over an hour. I thank you to everybody who let us poke through your Dropbox and take a look at the work you've been producing. We'll kind of do that a little bit again next week for our final week of the spring semester. We're going to post the little C4D demo we did today on YouTube as well, so hopefully there's some information in there that's helpful to you. And let's go through the finish line strong here. Anything you've got that you're working on for your classes, let's try to finish strong, have a great final session, and then it'll already be time to talk about the summer semester, who's taking a break, who's moving on to the next class, all that good stuff. So any questions or comments, you guys know where to find me. And thank you so much to everybody who hung out, Alex, Brian, Kamal, Robert, Mike. Appreciate you guys taking some time this morning, and we will talk